Okay, so this video is going to be an example of what a good video would look like for these sample quizzes. So I'm going to walk through the problem from last class from the sample distribution with the texting. It was part C, the texting problem. This is going to be an example of what you would want to do in order to get the full credit for the sample, for the quiz questions for this week and for future weeks. So first thing you'll notice is that all the work is already done. You don't need to do the work as you go through the video. You can start by completing everything and then just focusing on the explanation. So this is what you might start with. I would start by articulating that in the problem, it talks about saying that the average person texts about 100 texts a day with a standard deviation, population standard deviation of 20, and we survey 50 teenagers in this case. The problem is asking for what is the probability that the sample mean of those 50 people range between 95 and 105. So what is the likelihood that if we were to survey 50 people that the average of that survey will be between 95 and 105 text messages? So we know that in this particular problem, because we're dealing with a sample average, we need to deal with a sample distribution because we're wondering when does a particular data point fall between these two parameters. That particular data point in this case is a sample average, so we can use a sample distribution. We also know that the sample distribution is approximately normal because of the central limit theorem. Central limit theorem says that if we have more than 30 people in a particular sample distribution, in a particular sample, that sample distribution will be approximately normal. Now, because that sample distribution will be approximately normal, that means that we can use z-scores in order to do that. Well, the z-score formula deals with looking at how far away a particular data point is from the mean, x bar minus mu, divided by the standard deviation. And in this case here, the standard deviation is standard error, and the standard deviation is sigma over the square root of n. So we're going to use this formula to figure out how far away are these particular data points from the mean. We also know that if we're dealing with a sample distribution, that the mean of the sample distribution is the same as the mean of the population. So if the mean of the population is 100 in this case, then the sample distribution's mean is going to be 100 as well. So we're trying to see how far away is 95 from 105 in the sample distribution. So we find the z-scores of both using that formula, and we plug them in and we find that the z-scores are negative 1.77 and 1.77 respectively. So the question becomes now, instead of looking at what is the probability of having a sample average between 95 and 105 text messages, the more general question is what is the probability of getting a z-score in between negative 1.07 and positive 1.07. And that's shown in the diagram over here. It's asking the same question, we're just looking at the general case. And by looking at the general case, we can use the table, the z-score table that we have been working with when dealing with z-scores. Now to find the probability between two values, and because the table only gives us everything to the left of one particular value, one particular z-score, what we want to do is take the middle part by saying, all right, everything below 105, or below the 1.77 if we're dealing with z-scores, everything below 1.77, subtract away everything below negative 1.77, because all of this minus this additional section will leave exactly what we're looking for. So we're doing all of this minus what's below negative 1.77. Well, if we go to the table, we see that these are the probabilities here. Then we take the difference of those two to get our final answer of 0.9232. So if we want to figure out a probability, we need to figure out, excuse me, if we want to figure out a probability, we want to figure out what percent of the curve is shaded in, what's the area under the curve in between those two values. And by walking through this process, we see that about 92% of the curve is covered in between those two things. So 0.9232 is the probability of getting a sample mean between 95 and 105 text messages. Okay, so that would be an example of a very strong video. Noticing that every step is explained, you're not focusing heavily on what you're plugging in where. That's more self-explanatory. You're more focusing on why are you doing a particular thing. So why are you using z-scores here? What allows you to do that? And why are you doing things like subtracting in this case? Why are you finding these two and subtracting? So answering more of the whys to what you're doing is more important than the what's that you're doing. I can see what you've done here. You want to focus on why are you doing that here? Why are you even concerning yourself with an X bar? What implications does that actually have? So that should be the focus of your videos. Good luck. If you have any questions, send me an email.